Thank you so much. I'm going to give you a quick little background into what I do and kind of the framing of this whole talk. So if any of you have ever been around Asheville, I have been part of that permaculture community around Asheville, all the rowdies like Andrew Goodhart Brown and Chuck Marsh and Val and all those guys, because way back when I started with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. And I'm going to give you my job interview, okay? Commissioner Graham, you guys remember Jim Graham? God bless Jim Graham. All right, this is my job interview with Jim Graham. Now, he always had a cigar in his mouth, right? So I'm sitting across from him, and he's smoking a cigar. And he goes, "Where are you from?" "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from the Ozarks of Missouri." The next question was, "Do you hunt?" I said, "Yes, sir, I hunt." "What do you hunt?" I said, "I hunt quail." And he had been down to Warsaw. He knew Sedalia was a state fair. This guy had a memory like you couldn't believe. The next thing he said was what hired me. He said, "Do you know who Jim the Wonder Dog is?" Now, Jim the Wonder Dog was the most amazing hunting dog. If you guys look this up on Google, this dog was a psychic dog from our neck of the woods, and 2 towns in Missouri laid claim to him, Warrensburg and Marshall, because this dog had been in both of those towns. So I said, "Yes, sir, Jim the Wonder Dog was the most amazing hunting dog that ever lived, and there's a statue to him in Marshall, Missouri, and one in Warrensburg." And he turned to Howard Singletary and Bill Dickerson and said, "I got no problem. This guy's a country boy. Sign him up." That's my first and last job interview, you guys, right there. I come out of that meeting going, I was ready to tell him 10 years of me being at Virginia Tech and draw graphs, and what he wanted to know was I was a quail hunter, right? So, now how does that segue into this? When we would hunt quail, we would go to our farming buddies and say, "Any of you all growing millet?" I'd say, "Oh yeah, we're growing millet." "Would you leave the outer 10 rows around there for the quail?" And you do that for about 10 years in a row. Let me tell you what, my favorite thing to do is my dad would go to me and he'd go, "Okay, you can go tell Mom." And I'm 10 years old. I'll go to my mom and go, "Mom, we're not going to have a turkey this Thanksgiving. I've shot enough quail. We can have quail for Thanksgiving." And my mom would feign that she was really proud of me. They'd have all this set up. But the reason we were able to do that, and partly the reason I'm telling you this, is what we would call farmscaping. So I learned real early on about bringing in the right plants to attract animals. And so part of what I'm going to tell you today is I use my quail hunting experience to save these trees, or help to save these trees, all right? So, let's go. Enough blabbing. Here's Mark Delusky. He's a guy from Georgia. The reason that I put this in here too is here's a Sasagi skimnus beetle that doesn't work, but they release millions of these things. But he had the right idea. The Georgia people had the right idea. Let's start thinking creatively. I'm into market solutions to problems. Okay? I'm not afraid of science. But I just want to show you guys this because you guys are a group of idea people. And this is all about having the right ideas. Here's my wife. I'm spending 100 nights a year away from her, so I want to put a picture of her in there and nod to her because you can imagine how patient she is with an ento geek like me. The other thing I'm going to tell you is I did a lot of work in China. And anybody in China that's about my age went through the Cultural Revolution. And I'd go to a bar with these guys and we'd start drinking, and the ones that really got tortured start crying and tell me, "I need to tell you something." And this happened to me over and over again. They would come in, grab these guys, and the next thing you know, for 5 years they're planting rice because they were a professor and talking like I was. And they would attribute all the advances that were made to these little kids in the Red Guard that wasn't doing anything. They were all brainless. But the reason that I tell you this is they used to say, "Oh yeah, you get this little group of kids and they're going to solve a problem." Bullshit. Kids are kids. Even the Chinese knew this, right? So I'm going to tell you right now, yes, I'm a hippie up in the mountains, but guess what? I'm a science citizen. I'm not citizen science. I have 3 degrees. I have a degree in IPM, a master's degree in entomology, and a PhD in entomology, and I was a biocontrol administrator. If you're going to save your trees, those are the kinds of people that you want. I'm not talking about me, but I'm talking about people that are trained to do what they're doing. Or they have the attitude to be trained. I didn't know anything about this 17 years ago. I didn't even know what a hemlock, I kind of knew what a hemlock looked like, all right? So anyway, here's a big thing that we all need to know here. 2/3 of our hemlock forest is on private land. Guess what? The Forest Service is interested in saving the hemlocks that are on their land first. They're mandated to save their national forest. So 2/3 of the hemlocks are not under that system, even though they're trying to be addressed, okay? And later on, we'll get to how researchers and field folks need to. So, I'm going to stop here, and I want to give you a couple points real quick. Hemlocks are really unique trees. They don't compete with the trees that are out here right now. Right now, all they're doing is they're growing off the stored nutrients that they got from last winter. As soon as these trees out here drop their leaves, these hemlocks turn on. And that's when this adelgid comes out, because this adelgid knows that these trees are making carbohydrates. So if we have a predator that can take that adelgid and kill it, then all those carbohydrates that would have gone to that adelgid now go back into these trees. Okay? Here's the next thing, because I have an undergraduate degree in IPM. What's the threshold? The first thing I want to do is I'm not into elimination. I want to know what is the level that doesn't hurt the trees anymore. That's all I want to go for. Okay? Hemlocks that have adelgids and predators grow better than hemlocks without adelgids. And if you want to see that, follow me out to Seattle, and I'll show you some eastern hemlocks and some Carolina hemlocks that are bigger than any back here, because they're sitting in a system where those adelgids were already native. Okay? So, proper identification of the pest is number one, okay, when we're talking about IPM. Although this adelgid was native to Japan, it's native to our own country. It's native to the Pacific Northwest of our own country. Once you know that, you go to the Pacific Northwest, like Puget Sound, there's hundreds of eastern hemlocks and dozens of Carolina hemlocks, and none of them ever been treated. The people there, when you ask them about adelgids, they go, adelgids? You mean those white things? Well, they just kind of come and go. Yeah, they just kind of, that's what they do in a balanced system, all right? So, real quick, because I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you. Look at this 9 main points. This is what we go by. So when people start, you guys here are going to be the people that are going to help us change the attitude about what people are saying. When I got into this, I was told the hemlocks are doomed, right? But look here, what's the very first thing? After me working for 7 years, I started in 1999, and the first 5 years we'd have groups like this, and we just sang Kumbaya and cried, because we didn't know what, we didn't know what to do. In 2006, I'm sitting in a meeting with Nathan Havel, and this guy says a Hemlock Woolly Adelgid is native to the Pacific Northwest. There are strains of it native to China and strains native to Japan. Okay? This was done with DNA. I just went back and saw my mom, and she likes to watch Paternity Court on TV. Good grief, that is the craziest show, right? But what is it about, right? It's about proving where something was from. So here suddenly in 2006, I'm in a meeting, and I needed an adult diaper because what this guy said almost made me poop in my pants, because the adelgid is native to our own country. The adelgid has a winter generation and has a summer generation. There are specific predators that go after this winter generation, and if you can reduce the winter generation of the adelgid, you can save trees, because that's what kills these trees, is they're blocking the carbohydrates from getting to that tree in the winter. So it doesn't matter. It could be under this ceiling in the summer, and it'll grow like crazy because it stores nutrients. All right. That's it. That's the 3 things that I mean, there's 9 things here, but the main thing that I want to tell you guys is this. And here, once again, I'm coming back to this thing about farmscaping, because here I've shot my mouth off for more than 20 years with Carolina Farm Stewardship and Organic Grower School. I know all those guys. So if this stuff worked, more conifers are better, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, because all conifers have adelgids, and these predators are adelgid specific, not species specific. So they eat adelgids in hemlocks, they eat adelgids in spruces, they eat woolies and Fraser firs, and they eat pine bark adelgids in 2-needle pines and 5-needle pines. Okay? When I drive down here in the morning, I go by these fruit stands and there's all this stuff out there these people are selling, and none of it's native. I'm going to start stopping and picking that stuff up and just driving off with it. And a big push that we need to do, and I'm not totally a native freak, but we should be planting a lot more native stuff. And so this gets back to our native biodiversity. I don't want to go into this very long, but I do want to bring this up real quick. Was when we have a problem like this, you got to split it into two parts. You got to have an operational part that's going to save these trees, or going to inject trees and do what we need to do right now, whether it's soap or trench them, whatever. Let's save these trees. Then your research guys who are not under pressure because they're getting paid. We go to these meetings and these guys are like, "How come you guys are so amped up?" And it's like, well, if your house is surrounded by hemlocks and you're watching them die, you're going to be amped up. The research guys, good science takes time, but as soon as we knew about that DNA, guess what? I was on a plane ticket within a month going out to Seattle. But you know, these guys are slow. So what we need to do is split into two groups. I'm going to be talking to you guys, or you're going to be talking about another forest pest here in the next couple of years, whether it's emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, pine sirex, wood wasp, all this stuff that we're getting from China. So we need to do this real-time response ninja stuff fast. And this other stuff will come, but those guys are not under the pressure that we're under. Okay. Here's where we were for the first 7 years that I was on this project. Here's what I was told. The adelgid's native to Asia, which is correct. That's true. We have no effective natural enemies back east, and here's what I was told over and over again when you would go to these meetings, is a hemlock forest is doomed. By 2006, though, see, this is prior to 2006. There were even publications put out about there were no natural enemies found in Seattle, which is totally wrong. I don't get this. This paper threw everybody off for 10 years. So I'm from Missouri, and you know Mark Twain, what he would say here, I'm going to quote it, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And as the older I get, the more humble I'm getting. Let me tell you, I'm eating humble pie all the time. So, this was the game changer for us. Here's this guy tells us that this adelgid's native to the Pacific Northwest. Holy cow. So what we started doing was going to these areas in here where we had found, this is where the western hemlock is, but we were getting them and we wanted to bring them over where we were. And if you look at the climatic zones, they look pretty close, you know what I mean? So when we were able to move these beetles, they hit the trees running. They didn't have a problem with this, okay? So now, 7 years into this project, we knew this bug is native to our own country. It has winter and summer predators, some of which are specific and some which aren't. And the other crazy thing that we started finding, because I was working with the people in Washington Park Arboretum, I started asking these guys, are there eastern hemlocks in Seattle? And they're like, oh, there's hundreds of them. And there's a book called Trees of Seattle, and they've listed all the eastern hemlocks. And we start finding eastern hemlocks all over the place because back 10, 20 years ago, a lot of people, apparently eastern hemlocks were really cheap. So I could go to places in Seattle that are corporate headquarters, and the four corners of some of these places are all planted in eastern hemlocks that are just growing. They're growing, and also Carolina hemlocks. Okay, so you guys know this. We just want to go through it real quick. These adelgids are at the base of the needle. These little things you see here are the cast skins because it goes through 5 instars. Okay, so every time that it's in that woolly thing and it molts, it pops that little skin out. So it kind of looks like a bowling ball. Usually there's 3 of them. By the time it gets big, you'll see them like that. And of course, these guys, this is what kills a tree in the winter. These guys are intercepting that food that should be going into the tree because it's going to store it like a battery. So the nice thing with this predator we've got, this predator eats 6 to 8 of these a day. It's a vampire. I didn't understand it at first because I thought it would eat the whole beetle. But it slits the neck and it drinks the blood. And the blood is fluorescent, so we'll get to that in a little bit. That's something else. All right. This is from 2006, you guys. Now, if I showed you is, this, we're almost generally infested in a lot of these areas. Just to know that it's really bad. And of course, you've also got Michigan, and you've got this area in Canada where it goes up all the way into Nova Scotia that's not being shown here. So, here's what I'm going to tell you. We've been putting this beetle out, this winter predator beetle out, since 2003. It's 13 years later. This beetle is 80 miles in every direction from where it's right on the edge to being here. Think of 80 miles from Boone. Okay? We've collected and given the Forest Service over 63,000 of these beetles. But they don't know what to do. Should they say that we saved them and then they might not get, or should they say, well, we're not really sure, but we need a lot more money? All right. We've got over 20,000 square miles of hemlock regrowth in the 7-county area of the high country, because the other thing I'll tell you guys is we had to pick an area, right? If this is war, I got to pick an area. I couldn't save the whole East Coast. But I could start at Grandfather Golf and Country Club, and then we proved it worked, and then, man, we busted out, and we haven't stopped yet, okay? The other thing, and so here's the 3 things I'm going to go through. This is that native winter predator, Laricobius. We discovered one of the summer predators, which I'll go into in a minute, and then ultraviolet light, ice is a cake, because this gets pretty funny. Okay, so here's the deal. Here's this little beetle. It's about 1/8 of an inch long. The Canadians told us about this. I was in the meetings where the Canadians came to us and said, hey, we got this beetle. It's a confidential business secret with Weyerhaeuser. You guys will probably not hear about this in the press, but here I am having it recorded. Weyerhaeuser Lumber Company used this beetle as a trade secret to suppress adelgids in their hemlock seed orchards, and they could sell their hemlock seed way below the price of Boise Cascade and these other things. I grew up in the lumber industry, by the way. So part of this karma for me is putting trees back. 7 generations on my German side of my family. The thing that I really want you guys to know, this is a crazy winter active predator. Nobody even realized this thing existed. Nobody realized it didn't come out till October. So McClure and those guys totally missed this because they were out, they would stop in September. And they would come in May. Just like, if I was an entomologist, that's what I do. But guess what? Duh. We have to have the Canadians coming to us, and the Canadians use their hand like this in Second City, right? You have a predator that could save your trees. Okay? It's even in the literature. If you guys go back, the other thing that I can give you guys, and Pam has it, and I have no problem, I'll give you all the data, this has all been worked out. It's in the literature. You just got to find some of this stuff, all right? So the long story short, when we went out, we got 97% predation rate the very first time we studied this bug. And I was told in my career, you will never see an insect like this, right? Because I'm an entomologist, right? And they go back to Vidalia beetle or one of these big successful biocontrol programs that saved the citrus industry in California. There it is. You'll never see this, by the way. So I'm like, okay. So 30 years into my career, I'm like, no, I don't think I will ever see one of these. And then all of a sudden, boom, there it is. So David Moselle and Professor Robert Guerra, who's retired from the University of Washington, got almost the same predation rates that we got here in that publication. So what it told us right away, we had to go out ourselves. And holy cow, once again, it was like, this thing is great. And here's how we find them. If you take that ovisac, this is what we were doing. We don't do this anymore, but this is primitive. We take an ovisac and put it on electrical tape and drop pure alcohol on it. Pure alcohol. And it dissolves that cottony mass away, and what is left are the adelgid eggs, which are this burgundy color. And the Laricobius egg is 4 times bigger, and it's yellow. And under ultraviolet light, it glows green like Venus in the sky at night. You should see this. We're going to get to that in a minute. That's really fun. So the other thing that we would find is we would open these things up and we find these little Lari larvae. These little larvae eat 250 eggs, or they'll catch the crawlers and grab them by the head and blow them in and out like a balloon and suck them dry and spit them out of the way. We should have a movie of that, so we just have it run over and over again. So the really cool thing that you would find out west, these eggs are way bigger, the egg sacs. They have like 150 eggs per egg sac. So these guys have to leave the natal ovisac. They have to leave the ovisac that they are born in and go to another ovisac to complete development, because you're 250, all right? Up where we are, we only get 25 eggs per ovisac. So you have to have these female beetles are really smart. They will only lay eggs if there's like 10 of them in a row. And then they wipe them out. It's a beautiful thing to watch. So, I'm getting really excited doing this because we dissected 1,200 ovisacs to begin with. And since that time, I've done just jillions of them, all right? So here's our first release area. It was on some old growth trees. That tree died because we only put 30 beetles on it. And if I could go back in time, I could tell you, I'll guarantee you that tree will die unless you treat it. Okay? So treating becomes important too. If you could buy time for these trees back when all this was going on, you could save a lot of trees. Okay? So we put beetles out there. It's the first release of beetles. These were lab-reared beetles from British Columbia, reared in a lab. The beetles probably cost $35 to $50 a piece if you realistically put the price of the student slave labor that it took to raise these beetles. So later on, we were able to do is get a plane ticket and go to Seattle and catch these things hand over fist, contrary to what everybody else says. Okay. So anyway, we're doing sampling. This is Gina Luker, who was with the Forest Service. She and I are sampling. We're finding beetles, and we're going way up high and clipping and looking at the ovisacs. And at first, we weren't finding, but just very few. This is actually 3 years after release. But then suddenly, boom! And by 3 to 4 years in, even with 300 beetles, they started multiplying. And you guys, that's almost 100% predation, because these guys are in one sac and they've got to go to these other ovisacs. So, and sometimes they'll overshoot more than 100%. Okay? Here's another thing that I see both here and also back in the Pacific Northwest where we were doing these studies. We marked limbs and we had study limbs. And so here's one of our study limbs. This had 486 ovisacs on it. It had 97% predation rate. The very next year, the same limb looked like this. It only had 4 ovisacs on it. And I'm going to tell you the whole story, because here's what happens. The Adelgids will go into an outbreak, and the beetles come in within a year and just quash it down to where you've just got very few, like 4. And that starts the whole cycle over again. Because the beetles won't come in and lay an egg if there's not ovisacs next to each other. So the Adelgids get a little bit of a break, and they start reproducing again, and it takes 5 to 7 years in the city for them to go back into this phase. In the forest, we see them go into balance, and they just never go out, unless there's some kind of disturbance, unless there's drought or lightning strikes or something like that. It's like a top finding itself. It just went whoop, and now it's back up again, and it's in balance, and it doesn't go out. So our original releases were these little 30 beetle releases. This is in infrared to show you where the conifers are, because the conifers are all in red. There's a lot of, this is Banner Elk, okay, and this is Hemlock Hill. And so all the first stuff that we did was really intensive, where we were just looking in this one area and we're watching the beetles disperse out, and they're going out. And within 5 to 7 years, just with 300 beetles, now they were in a half mile, and this is 2010, 6 years ago. Not only were we finding it there really quickly, but also Delaware Water Gap, we did work there. Those guys told me they couldn't find beetles there because they were using a white beat sheet. But I want you guys to notice, all these spots here are where we found beetles, and from here to there is 35 miles. The other thing was I was staying out on I-81 over here to Best Western. This was Stroudsburg over here. That's Hickory Run State Forest, and this is where I was staying. So this is 25 miles. So these things, and it's not just working here, it's working almost every place that we put large amounts of beetles out. So that's a big thing. And so one of the things that happened, the larvae of Lari are white. So if you have a white beat sheet like the Forest Service gives you, you're not going to see these. So I show up with SpongeBob SquarePants umbrella. And they're like, what is that? And I said, you can see the larvae, the very first beat. There are the larvae that those guys missed. So they told me they couldn't find any. When we finished up, we had a map like you guys just saw, because you have to be trained at what you're doing. If you're not trained, you can't find this stuff. Okay, now we knew that this worked. But I couldn't get money from the Forest Service because I'd been such a loudmouth at all the meetings and rejected the status quo that I was not looked upon with the most favorable. Okay, so what do? What's the most wealthy resort in the high country? Grandfather Golf and Country Club. I cold call them and tell them that I want a meeting with their board of directors. And I meet with Pete Gurdon, their superintendent, and he looks at me and he said, do you think these guys are going to believe a long hair like you? And I said, you let me get my foot in the door and let's just see what happens. So I went to their board of directors meeting and did the Shark Tank, and I walked out with $25,000, which is what I wanted to put beetles out on their 1,100 acres and monitor it every other week for the whole year and go to Seattle and get them beetles. So the very first time we went out, I got them 3,600 beetles. So we did releases of 300 beetles. And let me tell you, 300 beetle releases are bombs. So the very first time we went out, we pre-selected. This is a diorama that's up at Grandfather Mountain, and that has Grandfather Golf and Country Club here. We finally got a little bit. We had such bad luck for so long, and then finally it flipped because this is a 6,000 foot tall beetle dispersing unit. I went to these guys after 2 years and said, you have beetles everywhere on your property, you can stop. And they said, no, we're good citizens and we realize what's going on now, we want you to keep doing this. I kept going. They kept letting me go, and they would let me make releases in beach bog and all these sensitive places, but they don't want people to know that, so nobody knows that. Okay. So here you have this giant 6,000 foot tall mountain, and when we had a 70-mile-an-hour windstorm, it blew these beetles all the way to Lenore. It really did. Okay. So you see these hemlocks here. This was taken back in 2010. These hemlocks now are gorgeous, by the way. Our hemlocks have been regrowing since 2009, nonstop, and we've been getting triple flush growth a year. For those of you that work in Christmas trees, you know what I'm talking about. Is you get a leader, then you get laterals, and then you'll get another leader that'll grow, which is your third flush. So by 2012, look here. Here's where we started, that little dot. Now, boom. Okay, it took a while, but it's bugs, Bugs take a little while, but man, once they get going. So here's Grandfather, there's Boone. This is by 2014. We had collected 60,000 beetles from here and given them to the Forest Service. Okay, and then the polar vortex happened and wiped our Adelgids out, so we're not able to collect now. Maybe when things get back up. Will. So what happened, I want you guys to see this. We put 300 adults out. Look at these. This is years. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Boom! So 5 to 7 years with a small amount of these beetles. And you can get them. So that's what we started to see. Right about here was 2009. And since that time, it's been 7 years later, and our trees are just regrowing everywhere. So the other thing that I did was went out and looked from the border of Virginia all the way to Mars Hill, North Carolina, and we found beetles everywhere. From just below the mouth of Wilson, out here, Sparta, that's Stone Mountain, all the way down here to Mars Hill. And then we've also made releases down in cashiers, and there are beetles down here too, and they're spreading out. But I don't have the manpower and the time to be spread out all over the place. I can be up in my neck of the woods. I can be in one area, but I can't be in all of them. But getting the beetles out is the main thing. Okay? So here's our original release trees, 1 through 5. This is in July of, look at that, that's 7 years ago. These trees are gorgeous, but they did go into dieback, but then they came back out. So that was the thing that we started to notice, is you would start to see this greening effect, and you didn't see it anywhere else. Where the beetles weren't, the trees either died, or if they were treated, you know, you got something. So here we are on top of grandfather, and the other thing I want you to notice is we're above the hemlock line here. This is spruce and fir. You got Fraser fir and red spruce, which were the first things that were logged out of most of these areas back in the day, especially the red spruce, because that was a valuable lumber tree. So that's another thing we need to bring back in. The other thing, though, that I'll tell you is these trees have adelgids on them. The spruce has Cooley spruce gall adelgid, and the firs have balsam woolly adelgid, and the pines have pine bark adelgid. So these beetles have all kinds of food out there that we forgot, that we didn't really realize at first, all right? So here we are turned, this is up in the Mile High Bridge at Grandfather. That's Hawksbill. There's beetles there on Carolina hemlocks because we put them out there. And the other place we put beetles a long time ago was here on the Black Mountain Range with the folks at CeeLo, all those permaculture folks. We gave them beetles in 2008. So there are beetles everywhere in this area. This is the Forest Service release map to show you where releases were made, and the little black dots are all recoveries that I have made that I have entered into the Forest Service database. So, you know, look down here. There were a lot of beetle releases made in this area, and of course I've recovered them a couple times. This is a recovery at Big Ivy, and then up where we are, of course, there's recoveries all over the place. So I just wanted to put a few in there. Okay, so really quickly, just with the summer predator, we got successful control of the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid with one predator, which is normally very unusual and somewhat nervous because if that predator goes, it turns out though there's a native predator called Laricobius rubidus that gets on the pines and it moves over onto the hemlocks and it can mate with nigrinus and they produce progeny, so they're actually biotypes of each other. So that's in the handout. Okay, so once again, here's your threshold. This is if a tree's in a good spot. If it has 30, a third or less adelgids, it's probably going to be okay. If it gets more than that and it's in a spot that's not good for hemlocks, treat it or do something. Spray it with soap. But get these beetles out here, okay? I just keep changing that because it should be 20,000 square miles. And the real crazy thing that I will tell you guys, if you want to collect these beetles, the place you want to put them and collect them out is in that urban community interface. So you want cemeteries, schools, hospitals, parks. So in the Puget Sound, I'm known as the mayor of Puget Sound now because I know all the people in the cemeteries. I know the homeless people in Woodland Park. You know what I mean? I know all these people now because this is where I've got to go. Now, back when we were doing this work, we saw this beetle. This beetle is the size of a sesame seed. The very first day that we were collecting Laricobius, we found this beetle, and so I was talking to those guys, said, what is this? And they said, oh, this is Skimnus. We're not interested in it. So, right? Well, after a while, I started picking this thing up because I'm going out there a lot, and suddenly, this is your summer predator. It's active right now. Not only does it like hemlocks, but it goes to spruces, pines, and firs that have adelgids on them. So I could go out west, and before where we were just collecting on hemlocks, now I could collect off two-needle pines like lodgepole pine, and I could collect off eastern hemlocks, and this thing eats the summer generation. Okay? So that gives us exactly what you have in the Pacific Northwest, which is bracketing. And this is what we want, and we've always wanted this in sustainable ag, is we want a predator that attacks every life stage of a pest, or a gill. So at first we had just the winter predator, but we didn't have anything that attacked the summer predator, so the summer adelgids could build up really high. Now we've got this, and there's a couple other predators that also attack it. There's silver flies and some other stuff, okay? This beetle likes trees that don't have needle duff. Laricobius, as that larva, has to drop to the soil and pupate, so it has to have needle duff. Here's a tree next to Fort Lawton, and they came in with a bulldozer and they removed the needle duff, and this tree went from being covered in Laricobius in 1 year to being covered in Scymnus in 1 year, and so I was like, aha. So, oh, and that's SpongeBob. Remember SpongeBob. Very important. So once we started researching into this beetle, we started finding that it had been found in 19 western states, and it was found in places that didn't have hemlocks because it's eaten adelgids. So this could be something we could, look, think of our tree industry back here. If this worked, if you didn't have to spray for woolies, how much money you'd save in Fraser firs? A lot. Okay? So there's no hemlock. I mean, okay, hemlock occurs in the 4 northern counties of California all the way up. The stuff that you're seeing out here are pines. It's feeding on pine adelgids or spruce. Okay? So here's a really important thing to remember here, is that beetle has alternate adelgid hosts, okay? It reproduces within the tree. It likes dry habitat. So if you look out here at these trees that are out here, these trees are actually looking at us while we're talking. That's the kind of habitat that it likes. And if you think of the ridges over here, where you've got something like Stone Mountain, or you got these big bluffs, these beetles are all over that. So when I go out west, I have to talk to the Bigfoots to let me go collect, and they're pretty mellow in general. Now, so here's what here's the big breakthroughs. Not only can we find them on hemlocks, right? Here's a lodgepole pine with male cone flowers, because these things like pollen. Ladybugs like pollen. Now you're getting into my neck of the woods. You start talking ladybugs, you're back where I understand. So here's a larva. These larvae are white, just like the Lari larvae. Here's a picture from my house. Here's a white pine seedling, and it's got Scymnus on it because they're eating the pine bark adelgids. And I just found one day before yesterday at my house. So they are there. So this could be potentially the next big. Larry's big. This could ice the cake and actually help us with other conifers, improve our forest health. And so the very last thing I'm going to tell you about, I'm spending 100 nights a year in Seattle. And when I first was going there, I could only afford about $50 a night. So I'm staying down on Aurora Avenue in Seattle, down around 85th Street. So let's just say that's kind of the working district of Seattle. So for example, I'm staying at the Everspring Hotel on 85th and Aurora.
You're lucky you're alive.
I'm lucky I'm alive. Yes, it was run by the Ukrainian mafia, which I didn't know at the time, until I interrupted these two guys that were as tall as the ceiling counting out euro notes. In the lobby, I come in one night and they go, "Ooh," and of course I just went, "Please." I pushed the elevator button and it opened. And I got away. So the room to the left of me had a hooker with a pit bull, and the room to the right of me had a hooker with a pit bull in it, right? So anyway, I wasn't too worried about that. I was kind of worried about that. But the thing that worried me was, because I'm an entomologist and I'm reading my journals, and I had read that you could detect bed bug by using ultraviolet light, which is so the very first thing that I did, I'm like, where can I go in Seattle to get a bed ultraviolet light? So there's this crazy novelty shop in Seattle called Archie McPhee's. And they have like 3-foot rubber cockroaches, and all this crazy stuff. And I was in there and I bought a spy pen. In fact, I bought 2 spy pens. The very first thing I did is go back to my hotel room and find bed bugs. There's a pattern on the wall, and it goes down to a baseboard, and I look behind the baseboard, and here are the bed bugs. So I'm itching just saying that. So, of course, I vial it up and take pictures of it and take it to the owner of the hotel. And these guys, they've been trained. That's not a bed bug. And I'm like, I got a PhD in entomology, I'm like, this isn't going to work. I just need to go somewhere else. So one night, I'm bored, this is 5 years ago in March. My wife had gone to Raleigh to go to a women's gathering, and that's when I become Mad Sigmund. I get to do all the crazy things. So that night I went out with that pen, and I said, hey, I wonder if I shine this thing under hemlocks, I wonder if the ovisacs would glow, because they're white, right? So, but what do the tree that I go to, I know has lots of Laricobius on it. I go and I shine that light, and it glows like crazy. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Well, it turns out adelgids have quinones in their blood. That's what makes them cold tolerant. When these predators eat the adelgids, their poop glows bright orange. So I published a paper on this. And in this paper, I had to describe how I did this. You can imagine me going back and forth with the journal editors because they're like, we don't want you to say some of the things that you've said in there. So I had to change, how I discovered this was I was looking for unwanted activity in hotel rooms. How was that? I'm like, what? They changed it, for me to get accepted. And then if I fuss with that, then it has to go back out again, So I'm like, oh, okay. An undamaged adelgid ovisac glows blue if it has honeydew on it. So what's really cool is you could go out with this and you're going to get color. You're going to get blue if it's okay. You're going to get orange if they've been eaten. The eggs, if the eggs are damaged, they glow bright yellow. That makes sense. You know what I mean? It's quinone with vitellin, and it lights it up yellow. Okay? The other thing that happens, and it's hard for me to take, I'm taking these pictures with an iPhone. So it's hard to take fluorescent photos. This is chartreuse, and chartreuse is yellow-green like antifreeze. I had to learn these fluorescent color descriptors, right? This is blood splatter from a vampire feeding on adelgids on a limb. I love it. It just killed like 6 adelgids. Walked down the limb, slits their throat, and drinks the blood out, and it's kind of, and then goes to the next one. So, this is my life as a geek, right? Woohoo! So I published this. This is published in the Journal of Entomological Science, and we have, I tried to put all this in a folder for Pam. So all this information is out there. Here's your damaged adelgid eggs. They glow yellow. So it's really cool. It kind of looks like Christmas lights because you have blue, yellow-green, bright yellow, and orange. And the cool thing about this is anybody can use this. And the other thing I'll tell you is one of the worst classes that I took when I was in school was insect physiology. And my professor was my advisor as an undergrad, and his name was Dr. Chippendale, and he was British, and he was very proper British, and he had tea every day at 2. If you wanted to come in and have some tea, you could have some tea. But here I was, this old redneck, hillbilly, Ozark guy. He used to look at me, and he'd just go, Richard, Richard, Richard. And I would just melt in front of him because I had a hard time understanding chemistry, if you can believe it. So, when I published this paper, I found my old physiology notes, and lo and behold, in my old physiology notes in my book, this stuff had already all been discovered. Back in the 20s and the 30s, the Germans and the Brits had gotten pine trees from us, and they got pine bark adelgid, and they called it American blight. one of the many American blights that may be right? But the cool thing was, look, they had identified everything that, so I was able to send a letter and a scientific paper to Dr. Chippendale and say, I might be your old redneck, but I never gave up. And he said, Richard, next time you're back, you need to come for tea. I said, okay. And so that's it. We'll just stop here. If you guys have any other questions about stuff, I'm glad to answer them. But here's what we've got. We've got this beetle established. Now that's actually 13. So this is 2 years old here, but it's still the same, 80 plus miles in every direction. You've got the summer predator. There's some other summer predators that are out there. And the real neat thing to me that anybody can do, but you need to wear eye protection. Because when I went to my eye doctor, he said, you have burned your cornea. And I said, I know why, because I've been using ultraviolet without protection. It's kind of fun to go out at night, but if you don't wear safety glasses, you're going to fry your eyes. So be careful. I'm okay now. But here's the thing that I'll tell you guys. For any of you that are arborists or interested in this, take this information. We've resurrected the hemlock nursery industry, baby. It is there. Go out and old nurseries and get these people. We'll either make these into bug insectaries, and I'm here to help. I'm a gentle capitalist, or whatever you want to call it. I'm an Adam Smith capitalist. I'm small. Let's keep it going. Yes. Beetles through me, probably the way we ought to do it if you guys want to. Oh, have you got that? Okay. Let's say that Pam, or if you guys want to work it through Pacolet, let's do that. And what we can do is give a portion of what we do to you guys so that you can start a kitty and start replanting hemlocks and Carolina hemlocks and red spruce and even Fraser firs, because in my neck of the woods, you find a Fraser fir up in the woods and it's all torn up and looks nasty and everything. But now is a different game. So I can't tell you how far some of this stuff goes, but I can tell you right now, as far as hemlocks are concerned, Eastern Carolina hemlocks, put the beetles to the needles.
Could you tell us just specifically, like Carol's got hemlocks, I think a lot of us do, and we've got 2,000 acres here.
Right.
Some of them are very healthy. We have new ones coming up, and you can see the growth. Some of them are dying.
Right.
But, and we're not going to be cutting them down.
Right.
But we need to have a sense of how much does it cost? What should, you made a point of don't just put a few, but
yeah.
How would you do this, and how much could you get away with by doing this?
Okay, you have three strategies. You have an inundative strategy. So my friends that work with Bill Gates that come to me, I can put beetles on thousands of acres for those guys. If you don't have that kind of resources, then what we do is we work strategically. And what we do is we figure out two things. One, we figure out what's the best spot to put these. Okay, here. Since you asked that question, all right, take a look at that tree, huh? No chemicals ever. Now, this is at my house, and a lot of these trees, if you guys go back, this may not be a good one, but a lot of these trees have these trees are like books, you guys. In the Christmas tree industry, you can go out and read where the dieback happened on all these trees. Because they'll come out and they'll have a sprig here that's dead up where we are. And then they regrew around this for the last 7 years. Look at that growth, okay? So this is first flush. Then your second flush, you're going to get your laterals. And then the other thing that'll happen is it'll pop another terminal, usually right about now if we get rain, okay? So the other thing that I'll tell you is this was teamwork. This was partly teamwork, but the other thing I'm going to tell you is the way we got where we got was we rejected the status quo. I didn't care to look good. And we learned enough to take care. We've got to have education enough to understand this stuff. It just so happened that I was in an area where all this stuff happened, and I had a skill set that was able to use. That same skill set is yours. We need everybody that can do this in the right way to do it. Now, let's look at collecting. Here's what you're talking about. Let's talk about how to collect and redistribute these things, okay? If you only have a certain amount of money, you can't get very much of what you want is an inoculative release, right? That's what we originally did. We only had 300 beetles. We're watching our forest die down, but then all of a sudden, there were enough because it starts the clock ticking, okay? So you have inundative release, you have inoculative release, and in between those two, you have what's called an augmentative release, which is You know what, I can only get 300 beetles this year, but I want 300 beetles next year, and I want 300 beetles the next year. That is like putting gas on a fire. You should see what that does. That makes these things just, they blow like crazy. All right? So the way that I do this is a picture from the Hooker Hotel, by the way. I can tell. Sorry. It's itching. Okay, so there's a couple different ways we can do this. I am on such good terms with the permitting section of USDA now, I can send eastern hemlock back to me, back west. I have all the permits to do this, by the way. There's a lot of regulatory stuff you've got to do. So I can take uninfested eastern hemlock foliage, or I can use Spanish moss or excelsior, depending on what we do, and put usually about 300 beetles per carton. Okay. The other thing to know is these field-collected beetles are more than twice as fertile as lab beetles, and lab beetles usually are diseased. We won't go into. So, this is in the guide sheet. Okay. This is all the stuff that we would use. You got a cooler, I got a notepad, an umbrella. That should have been SpongeBob, but I think I broke my SpongeBob umbrella. I've got aspirators. I've got my material. If any of you guys want to see a limited display of this, I can do this afterwards out here on some pines. I brought everything to do it, to show you. So what we're going to, you would go out and you would have a freezer pack or blue ice, because you're going to cool this thing down. These are pint paper cartons, like Ben & Jerry's ice cream comes in, or cup of soup, something like that. And I like them because plastic sweats. If you're going to use plastic, you need to put a brown paper towel. You don't want to use bleach paper towel, because bleach paper has chlorine in it, and it'll kill the beetles. If you put a regular tissue in there, you wouldn't think that. Okay. Pete Gurdon, grandfather golf and country club. Very first day that I'm working with him, this is the very first pounding that he's doing. He's in the guide sheet, because I decided if I was going to put anybody in that guide sheet, maybe it'd be good to put somebody from Grandfather Golf and Country Club in there, because they believed in this. So the other thing that happened with Pete, some people are naturally gifted entomologists. Pete is one of them, because he's a nature boy. Right away I started looking at him, and if you look at this picture, you look up close on his collar, I'm like, you are a beetle magnet. He helped me discover skimnus. He has an affinity to find these skimnus beetles. You know what I mean? You guys, I might be trained in this, but there's people in this room that's just as gifted as, you know, or more gifted than. So anyway, I used to joke with him about that, but there's beetle, and suck that off here and count that as one. So what we do, we're going to go out. We're either going to do it here. We'll do it up in Boone, because we're at the point where we almost have enough beetles again that we can redistribute, or I'm out west. I got my umbrella, not a SpongeBob. But what you do is go out and pound on stuff, and it all falls down. And I just have an aspirator. If you're in the state of Washington with an aspirator in a park, what do people think you're doing? They think you're smoking herb, right? So these guys coming over, right? First people are coming over to the park ranger guys, but they all know me now, so they're like, oh, it's you. But then you get the hippies and the homeless people coming up, and I'm like, look, we're sucking bugs here. And the guys, oh, I'll give that a try. And I'm like, no. All right, so in the debris, you're going to find your little beetles. And one little trick that you can do, if you've got it clear, you can float your umbrella. You have to take it straight down so nothing slides, but all these needles and everything will float off. And this guy will be left holding on, and what's ever left in the umbrella will be holding on. You can suck them up real quick. So that's something we can do this fall. What I would say that we're doing is, this was meeting number 1. We're going to have meeting number 2 in the fall, and we'll have meeting number 3 in the spring. Okay? So here I am. This was actually up at Banner Elk, right by Lee's McCrae. There's a little hedge there, and I got 106 beetles. And let me show you what 106 beetles looks like. That's what 106 beetles looks like. So it doesn't look like much, you know. People say, if you're going to try and count these things, you're going to go crazy, because you'll never get the number that I got. Some people were obsessed, you know. I'm paying $5 a beetle. I'll give you 2 extra beetles, or I don't know what, you know. So anyway, but these things work really good. So, of course, what we would do is I would have like cup of soup, And I crossed out the flavor and put Lari flavor, Laricobius. And then we ship them back and then put them out directly on the hemlocks. Record that. Yes.
Weather.
The weather doesn't really hardly affect these beetles at all coming from Puget Sound. They are impervious to rain. It's hard to collect them. I can't collect them in the rain. And it's dangerous to be out because in the Pacific Northwest, everything's conifers. And if you're out in a windstorm, you snap like that, and then you've got a 4-inch limb. So I try to stay out of areas like that. But you could put them out in the rain. Oh, yeah. I put them out. But they're all in, you know what I mean? They just follow it along. There's no weather here that those guys haven't experienced in the Puget Sound plus earthquakes. So they do pretty good. Drought with this beetle likes those wet coves. The summer beetle doesn't care about drought at all. In fact, the hotter it gets. I was out west last year, a little bit later than this, collecting the summer beetle. I was having to get up at 4 in the morning, which is light out there. I would start collecting before 6 because by 11 o'clock it's so hot, if you hit a limb, everything just flies away. So I was done by noon everything. You know what I mean? I had to go to bed before, while it was still light. So yes, the weather is when you're collecting these is pretty dependent. Releasing them, it really doesn't matter. I mean, as long as it's not a deluge or something. But I've released them in rain. They love it. You know what I mean? It's like rain, Puget Sound. We're home. The only thing they're missing is some coffee. And there's a lot of that in Puget Sound too. All right. So that's it. So I'll just, that's where we'll stop. But, so what I think you guys could do as a group, you could get together, figure out, this past season in the Puget Sound was the wettest season ever on record out there. It had 45 inches of rain from October to the end of April. So I got my butt kicked, and I had gone to getting paid by the beetle. Before I was doing it by the day, so it didn't matter what I did, right? Well then, so this next season, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to go out west and see actually what's going on and then come up with some kind of, if I find a lot of beetles, then I can do a per beetle price. If I can't find a lot, then I'm going to have to go a per day. Because otherwise I'm getting killed. And you see people are jumping off bridges and stuff like that out there because it's winter, and it's like, I could do that too. But, no.
You've been doing this for a while, but we're still not really tons of them out there. Are we seeing any negative consequences of mentioning Lari?
No. This has been a function of the fact that we started up earlier, where we do, and both of these beetles, whether it was this Laricobius nigrinus, it was tested for 7 years before it was ever put out. It's shown just to be totally specific only to adelgids. So it will go over onto pines. But there's no negative aspects to that I can think of. The same with this other lady beetle is we started in 2006 with that skimnus beetle, and it took till 2012 for us to get approval. And actually the way I got approval was I called Senator Richard Burr up and said, hey, can you light a fire under these guys? And he said, yeah, I can light a fire. And he lit a fire under those. And we got this beetle. So what I would say is not only we haven't seen any negative non-target, we're actually starting to see positive non-target because these beetles also eat these other introduced adelgids that our stuff doesn't go to. So these beetles eat balsam woolly adelgid, they eat Cooley spruce gall adelgid, and they eat pine bark adelgid. We need something that eats these because Cooley spruce gall adelgid and balsam woolly adelgid are introduced from Europe. They did a biocontrol program on it, but it wasn't successful. But I don't think they had the there was way more money thrown at this Hemlock Woolly Adelgid thing, and then of course we figured some stuff out. So this will work. I mean, if you're a Christmas tree grower, you should be seriously considering if this thing becomes established, This little golden black ladybug, that's the next big thing. This Laricobius beetle is all over the place. And it may not be down here, but it's all over where we're at. So, but this, oh, let me get back here, yeah. And this ultraviolet stuff works great. I mean, that is irrefutable. You guys can, I mean, anybody can do that. If you can go to a pet store and the fluorescent lights work better than LED. The LEDs work, but you have to have a wavelength that's down below 380 nanometer, okay? So here's your little, you know, here's your little golden black bug, if I get to it here. There. When I was doing the work on this, the guy that did all this work was named Mike Montgomery, and he's a lady beetle expert. And what he told me over and over again is that we don't have a good generalist adelgid predator back east. So maybe this is it. I don't know. It may be it. It may not be. One thing about working with Mother Nature is it kind of keeps you humble and you don't stand too close to the mirror because it ain't about you. It's about taking what everybody else learned that they're not doing and putting it together, and it works. So that's where we're at. So we can save trees. We're not guessing anymore. You guys have the guide sheet. We had a big meeting in Montreat in February. We had 130 people where we talked about this with the Forest Service. So, you know, the way that I would envision that is a Forest Service is like a giant water buffalo that has a nose ring. You gotta pull it along as hard as you can.
So if I got this overnight for you, these beetles, and put them out the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So that should theoretically clear up the tree issue.
7 years.
Well, here's the deal. It depends on how many you put out. Because if you can get enough, if you could put 300 beetles on a tree, you're not going to have an adelgid problem. They eat it up. The problem has been getting enough beetles consistently. But we're at a point where you can get some from laboratories, but the labs are going to give all their beetles to the Forest Service because the Forest Service paid those labs to raise those beetles. Unless you have connections. If you know Lamar Alexander in Tennessee, Lamar got beetles put on his property. I don't know how that happened. So I think, but what we want to do here is we want to look at your guys. The next thing we want to do is take a map of your guys' area, and I'm going to show you where beetles are already in your area or not, so that we can work strategically. Because that's what we've had to do all along. We've never had, we've been getting by with, skin of our teeth kind of. But we're at the point where we can make this work. Mm-hmm. Well, here's how we did it at Grandfather. They treated every tree over 4 inches in diameter, but every tree under 4 inches in diameter they left and had adelgids until the beetles got going on the 4-inch trees. Then it takes 5 to 7 years for merit. If you're using a imidacloprid, it takes that long for it to go out of a tree. When you see adelgids coming back on a tree that has previously been treated, there's not one atom of imidacloprid left. Because if there's one atom in there, it will kill adelgids. So the way that we did this in an integrated way was we said, okay, let's say you've got some big trees that are up on a ridge and they're kind of hurting. You're going to need to treat those, but you've also got all these trees down in the draw down there that look pretty good. That's where you're going to put your beetles, because they will immediately save those trees. They will move to your other trees, and you have a threshold. You have an action threshold, which would be the time to do that action threshold would be probably in November. Because what you do is you'd go out and you would say, how many adelgids are infesting my hemlock? If it's more than 30%, then I either need to have beetles in there that are doing the job, or I'm going to have to treat and keep that level below 30%. Because below 30%, the trees grow like normal. That's our threshold. So what we have to do for any other pest that comes in, if it's emerald ash borer, we've got to figure out what the threshold is. Because what started happening in Gesundheit, everybody started looking at just total, they just wanted annihilation. Right? I can't see an Adelgid. And some of the resorts are programmed that way, where the people that like hound ears, if they see an ovosec, they call the front desk. So now the front desk is having to go, it's okay now, we got beetles here. The whole 105, grandfather, hound ears, Linville, Land Harbor, Twin Rivers, all those guys got beetles from me, and boy, are they happy. Because we've saved their trees. They don't have to treat their trees anymore. If there's a tree they might have to treat, it might be a tree that's what we call off-site. So if you think about it, if we look out the window, we look up on Stone Mountain or whatever this is over here, and hemlocks are up there, if it's not a Carolina hemlock, it's kind of on the edge of its range. If you think of what's happened with gypsy moth in the northeast, okay, gypsy moth got to the northeast. Everybody's worried it's going to kill all the oak trees. Well, after 20 years, you don't have oak trees anymore up on those ridges because they weren't meant to be up there, and once they're defoliated right off the ridges where oak trees are supposed to be, they're still there. And that there's a fungus that came in. So that's part of what happens, is there's a balance. Yes, Skimnus is being released by me. And Virginia Tech is studying them, but once again, you've got to ask the right question. Here's the question they're asking is, can they lab rear them? And I'm like, none of these good predators are good lab rats. So, once again, they're trying, the question that they're trying to do is, can they mass rear these? Thank you guys. And it's easier to go out west and collect them. And I'm glad to train people here. And also, if people want to go back west with me, that's fine, but they need to agree that they're not going to exploit my sites, because that's what's happened in some places is people show up, and what they don't realize is I have people that watch all my sites, right? So the next thing I get a phone call, hey, there's a guy out here pounding. I'm like, well, that's cool if he was permitted to do that. But yeah, so
what about Grandfather Mountain Golf Course? Can you harvest them from there?
yeah, I can.
You'll have, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I made an agreement with them way back when. I said, if we're going to do this, and they moan and groan because they know the dollar value of what I'm hauling out of there. Because they're smart, but then I give them skimness, right? I said, I'll trade you some skimness. Yes?
30% infestation means 30% of the needles?
Yes. And the time of year is about November, you know what I mean? Because that's when, if your tree is wrapped up in November, then it's not getting the photosynthate that it needs. And so you want to take that off there and let that tree get that energy. Did somebody have a question over here? Yeah.
So, urban forestry funded some of your work.
Oh, yeah.
That's, a legitimate thing, but the big money in both state and federal is with wildland protection, wildfires, and this seems to me as a mitigation.
Oh, it'd be a giant mitigate because we can replant.
You're reducing fuel load if you keep these critters alive. And of course, urban forestry is a totally different house. They're isolated from forest protection. And
They're the red-haired stepsister that nobody likes.
Exactly. And you almost got to resell the sales pitch to the different arm of the...
He's making the biggest point that I can make here, that because the place that we catch the most beetles is not in the forest. And we figured this out, which is going to some place like the Puget Sound. The parks there are loaded with hemlocks. Or you know what I mean, or around here, go around Lake Lure, look at all the hemlocks, you know what I mean? So you guys could pick, what you guys would want to do strategically is you want to make releases on people's land, but you also want to make a central insectary that's going to come online in 3 to 5 years. There's somebody here, or there's a cemetery, Pleasant Grove Church, the cemetery is surrounded by him, something like that. You know what I mean? I'm just making it up off the top of my head. But you guys are the ones that know that, but I don't. There's abandoned hemlock nurseries. So you guys could work strategically and basically start an industry. But the point that he's making is when we go to these forestry meetings, if you say you're an urban forester, you have no validity because that isn't real. But in our case, it is what is saving. We're using that urban community interface to save the forest. It sounds, everything in this program has been counterintuitive. Winter bug, all this crazy stuff. So yes, you're at the point where with this guide sheet and we can work with Jill and with you guys and the plans, we've got it all. That part's all worked out. The part he's talking about is the perception. So that if I go to the North American Forest Insect Working Group conference that was just held in D.C., they didn't even have anything in their entire program on this.
Does all of this apply to eastern hemlocks as well as Carolina?
Yes, both. Carolina hemlocks are going to be in your more... Okay, so you got your two ecological zones. You got the wet zone, it's called mesic zone in ecology. And then you have your xeric zone, which is your dry zone. Carolina hemlocks have a taproot, like a carrot. So they are up on these ridges, and that's where they belong. So, when I go to Hawksbill and meet with the American Adventure Scouting Group with Mike Fischescher, and those guys bring mountaineering gear and look at me and go, "Don't worry, we brought you mountaineering gear." We go right under the lip of Hawksbill, and there's this big ridge that comes all the way down, and it's all Carolina hemlocks. So this works for both easterns, which are mainly in wetter areas. Wherever you find hemlocks, there's water below there. So yeah, you've got both of these beasts work, yes.
I grew up in the Puget Sound area and spend about 2 weeks in the woods every year there. What's the difference between eastern hemlock and western hemlock? You just described the Carolina hemlock.
Yeah. Okay, we have two hemlocks back west, right? You have mountain hemlock, which is Tsuga murciana, and then you have western hemlock, which is Tsuga heterophylla. And the name heterophylla describes the needles, because the needles on a western hemlock are like a Carolina hemlock, where they're bottle brush and they're all at different angles. If you look at an eastern hemlock, the needles lay flat like this. So I can drive around Seattle and I can see an eastern hemlock. Everything's real.
I'll be able to see now too.
Oh yeah,
If I don't
yeah.
crash.
Oh yeah. Well, or it's a rental car. So yes, and that was one of the really neat things to me was back when I was doing this work. It's gone now, but in Point Defiance, down right in front of Pullman's old statue there, was a Carolina hemlock that was about this big around. It was about 90 feet tall. And the very first time I had Mike Montgomery out there, Mr. Ladybug expert, I walked up to that tree and banged on it, and I got that skimnus beetle right off. So I'm like, looky here. This beetle knows it likes this tree. So that's one of the things we've been trying to do is put these beetles, not just where the eastern hemlocks are down low, but get them up where they go, which is up on these ridges. It's harder. But yeah, the Washington Park Arboretum, the Arboretum there in Seattle, good grief, they have 50 eastern hemlocks and about a dozen Carolina hemlocks. Mm-hmm. Yep. In fact, David Mauzell was the IPM coordinator for the Yale Forestry, and then he went to Seattle and was the IPM coordinator for Washington Park Arboretum, along with Chrissy Scannell, who was the arborist that I learned everything from. She's a genius. And so that's a really nice connection to make. And in fact, I've gone back there and given a talk similar to this. I gave them a talk more on where it came from, with them and teaching us, because they taught us. And the best way that I was able to say thank you to those guys was give them this ultraviolet stuff. So I was able to thank them in a way.
If we have been treating the eastern hemlock, that means it would not have either the Lari or the skinless tonic.
If there are no adelgids on there, because your tree's going to tell you if there's, like I said, as soon as the imidacloprid goes out, boy, they'll come back into them.
So if there's no adelgids
Yeah. So what we were able to do, like at Grandfather's, they had 1,100 acres. If you guys know Grandfather Golf and Country Club, they are 50% codominant hemlock. So the other thing that I was able to do to those guys is go to their board and say, how much is it going to cost you to log these trees out of here? Man, they sat up. Bing! Their trees have not had a drop of pesticide put on them since 2007. And any of you guys that ever want to go up there and meet Pete Gurdon and get a tour, maybe that's something we need to do as a group, because it would be really good for you guys to come up where we are and see what we have figured out that you guys can take and use right now. That's the big thing, is what we lost in time, we can make up for now strategically, because we know what to do and we know how to do it and we know where to put these beetles. And if you give me three places to choose from, I'm going to tell you which is the right place to put them and why. Or at least, as much as old noggin will do. Because I'll tell you what, you guys know this, the forest, man, you can't learn. The forest is like the stars. You're only going to be able to learn a little tiny bit of it, and it makes you more humble. The more you learn, it's just amazing what's going on out there. And that's why I thank you guys as a group, because you understand the value of what you're trying to preserve, and that's what's going to be sustainable for us later on. So, any other questions? Yes?
Are you saying that maybe the preserve come back?
With these bugs, it'd be worth, you know what I mean? We're at a new place. There's some stuff here we need to check out, and maybe it won't work, but boy, it'd sure be worth trying, and what if it does? How about all these people that don't like Christmas trees because they're chemically sensitive, and they're buying them from Whole Foods and they're paying twice as much? I mean, this is what I was doing back in the 90s, was working with people that would farmscape their Christmas trees. And so we didn't have to spray every year for woolies. They'd still come in, but if you could knock it down where you're spraying half as much, that goes in your pocket. So there's an economic side to this, and then there's the ecological side. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you ever come out with a number? If you did, I missed it, about the cost of the beetles?
Yeah, about $5. Okay, well, back when they were up in my neck of the woods, I was selling them for $2.50 because I didn't have to get in a plane and go battle the bed bugs and homeless. But now it's up to about $5. If I go out west and it's a bad season out there, I'm going to keep them at about $5 or so, or I may get paid by the day and just say whatever I get. I don't know. I got to work that out. That's a hard part about being in business. You can always be a better business person, but the minute that I went to getting paid by the beetle, I got killed. You know what I mean? But that's all right.
Do you ever come out and go on site?
Oh yeah. Oh sure. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perhaps what we could do is, because there are a lot of us who have, maybe smaller areas,
right,
or larger areas, and we'll connect with you and Pam. Is there a time in the next 2 or 3 months that would be good for you to come back and maybe have a schedule, and we find a place to spend the night if necessary?
Yeah.
No bed bugs?
Yeah, right. Well, I bring my ultraviolet light, so it doesn't matter what you say. Exactly. So yeah, I think what you guys could do is, even based on what you see here, you guys as a group could sit down and go, okay, I've got X dollars, we have these places that we want to do. What's the level of infestation at these things? If it's lower, then we can stay. Then we bought time over here. But if this place over here is on fire biologically, we're going to need to come in and treat to stop that fire and keep it from spreading. And then, like what Grandfather did, every tree, and they had a lot of trees under 4 inches, let me tell you, because I thought those were going to die. But boy, the beetles got going in that, and then as soon as the stuff came off those trees, we have verified samples of 40 feet up from Virginia Tech, where they took the larvae that we did. They got 40-some larvae, and they were all nigrinus. You know what I mean? So I was like, man, this is great. On those really big, these are 150-year-old, there's a lot of 150-year-old trees around there. Because that area was just never farmed. I don't know how they banged a golf course through there, but. So, and you guys know a lot of areas that are like that too, where there's these old trees that are along a ridge, and man, we need to save those old growth snags. Those are the places where we're going to be able to go back and get the genetics out of there. That, you know, here's a 300-year-old hemlock. There's something in that gene there. I don't know what, but those are the babies we want. Get them out.
Okay. Well, what we'll do is, if you will just watch, well, we can sign people up here. That's a good one. You would just get the portal, get the paper. If you're interested, then put your name and your email address, and we'll be in touch with Richard and find a time and give you plenty of notice. And what we'll do is we'll select, you know, 2 or 3 places that you can go and work, and then work out from there.
And if you guys want to talk to like Grandfather Golf and Country Club or Hound Ears Club, or, you know, I'm glad to give you names of people that I work with so that you get, you know, perspective. Because you know what I mean. Some of this needs to be, I'm trying to be a good businessman too, and you want an arm's length transaction. So the thing that would get me about some of these is these universities would be working with a particular bug, like let's say one from Asia, and they'd say, oh, this is the greatest thing. And it's like, yeah, but you're promoting yourself.
Well,
but
we all know that what you're doing.
Yeah, this has been proven. I mean, this is outside of me, but that's what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Is I'm just saying let's have healthy business practices here. But we're at the point where you guys could sit down, you figure out where your hemlocks are, what is the baseline of those hemlocks. You know, are they in danger, or do they have time? And then we go out and pound with an umbrella at the right time and see who's there. And if there's some there, you still may need a supplemental. But boy, I'll tell you what, there's been several times where I've gone out and I'm like, they're here. Now all you got to do now is make them. So if the trees are below 30% or they're looking pretty good, you don't need to treat them. Follow them with that ultraviolet light. You're not going to get a lot of brightness with the ultraviolet light until December, you know, because the Delta's got to get juicy enough to splatter. But then when the 2 times a year that you have eggs, which is now, maybe just a little past now here, and then starting in late January through March when you get the winter generation, boy, there's color out the wazoo because you've got all this stuff. So that's, and you can see that's the thing we could do too, is do a field training. Where we would do, I can actually send you guys some of our other you know, you just pick and choose what you want to do. But you guys as a group get together, get all that answered. So when we hit the ground, we hit the needles with the beetles.